Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're calling in from around the globe today. Welcome to our webinar on Business Process Management, BPM, a key component of ERP ROI. Welcome to our webinar. I am January Polk, and I will be one of the co-presenters today. I come from a manufacturing background with business process improvement experience. I have my Six Sigma certification as well as my ProSci certification for change management professionals, and I'll be presenting with Kim today.
Good afternoon or good morning. This is Kim Nininger, Director of Client Services for Management Consulting. Prior to coming into management consulting, I have over 25 years experience in industry with very large Fortune 500 companies growing through mergers and acquisitions. And my degree is master's degree is in organizational leadership with an emphasis on enterprise resource planning. And I do have a passion for people, process, technology, approaching it holistically to achieve your technology goals and execute your strategies.
During the presentation, if you like any of the stuff we're talking about, please feel free to visit our website at panorama-consulting.com to learn more about our service offerings, as well as follow us on Twitter at Panorama ERP, and visit us on Facebook and like our page at Panorama Consulting Solutions. A little special offer just for all of you for attending today's webinar. To thank you for your time, we are giving away a free 1-hour consulting session with one of our experts to the first 3 respondents after today's webinar. So please stay through today's webinar, and at the end, we'll put up some information around how you can obtain that free 1-hour consulting session with one of our experts. Okay, a little bit about our agenda today. So first, we're going to start off with giving a brief introduction about Panorama Consulting Solutions. Then we'll cover a little bit about the purpose of today's webinar and what we want to cover with you. We'll dive into the business value of process work, and then talk about business design and alignment, and then follow it up with some slides and information on how you can do a digital transformation strategy. And at the end of today's webinar, we'll leave about 5 to 10 minutes to answer any questions that you might have. So as we're going through, if there are any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box in your control center, and then we'll answer them. Okay, so who are we? We are Panorama. We are one of the industry's leading consulting firms in digital transformation, technology, and strategy. We come from a holistic approach where we do look at things from a people, process, and technology perspective. And we're also unique in that we're agnostic, meaning that we don't take kickbacks from any software providers. So if we're coming in to evaluate software and help you implement software, we do that from an unbiased approach. And we truly come in and try to understand your business requirements and business needs, and then help guide you through that selection process so that you select the right technology to fit those business needs. But really, it all kind of starts at the enterprise system strategy level, where we come in and we try to understand what systems you have in place, and then we put together a roadmap of what that strategy should look like for your business. We'll help guide you through digital transformation, coming up with new ways to do business using digital technologies and solutions. We help do software evaluation and selection, implementation. We also provide organizational change management activities throughout all these types of process and ERP implementation initiatives. We help companies look at their business processes from the top down, trying to put perspective around what their strategy is and how they deliver value to their customers, and what are best practices that they can utilize to deliver that value. If you're in an implementation, that's going sideways, we often are called in to help with project recovery. And because of our agnostic approach, we are also looked at to come into high-profile court cases to provide expert witness testimony to what went wrong in an ERP implementation failure. We help with independent verification and validation. So we act on the behalf of the client to make sure that the right activities and protocol are being followed through any implementation. And we also have a project management office arm where we have certified PMP professionals that can help guide you and through the project management aspect of your implementation. We service a wide variety of different industries, from manufacturing, distribution, professional services, retail, energy, food and beverage, government, healthcare, and we do use a global base of consultants around the world who come from various industries and consulting backgrounds. Altogether, we have over 30 years of ERP vendor experience. And most of our consultants have some type of certification that might include Lean Six Sigma, their MBAs, PMP, APIX certification. And we also offer our own 360-degree ERP certification course where we help guide and train our consultants through the process of helping you through your BPM and ERP initiatives so that we have consistency across our delivery platform. This gives you a quick breadth of our client experience. So you can see we do have a wide variety of clients ranging from billion-dollar companies to small $10 million companies to government entities, as well as a variety of different industries. And we also have a broad and deep ERP experience where we have experience with over 150 different ERP software packages. These are just a few of them. But because we're very boutique and agnostic in our approach, we do know a lot of different tier 2 and tier 3 type vendors that might service some of your specific unique requirements as a company. All right, so a little bit about the purpose of today's webinar.
Well, we first want to make sure that you understand, you go away from this time spent with us where you understand the value of BPM and how it fits into your ERP implementation. We also want to introduce you to the concept of the role of business design and alignment in your ERP implementation, and to also debunk common myths and misconceptions about BPM. What is that and what exactly is part of BPM? And then lastly, to review change management best practices.
So, the ERP project lifecycle. A lot of times companies ask us, where should we do this business process work? So this slide basically encompasses all the different activities that happen within any type of ERP project lifecycle. And ideally, you would like to do the business process work before even going into software selection. The more you understand the strategy of your company and how your business processes align with that strategy to drive it, the better off you are going to be to understand what your business requirements are going to be. You'll be developing your business requirements based off of best practices and based on what makes you unique and competitive in the marketplace. So it really helps guide you through that software selection to know what technologies do we really need to be looking at to enable our business processes, and what do those technologies look like? So it's really important to, I believe, start this up front. At the very least, doing it when you're starting that software selection process, but taking care to do it before you submit those requirements to a long list or a short list vendor. There are 3 levels of ERP best practices. So what we're trying to say is that there are going to be certain processes within your company that are just basic. There's nothing unique about them. Oftentimes, these processes present themselves in things like accounting and finance, how you pay your bills, how you pay your customers, how you create invoices, how you procure material. Those all might be pretty standard, and you can leverage out of the box functionality from a technology. Sometimes they're not, but those are common to most companies. Then there's going to be those processes that may be industry differentiators. So case management, or how, field services. That might be something that's an industry differentiator, and that might be important for your company because that's the industry you live in. And there might be some unique processes within it that you want to make sure you're capturing, or you want to make sure a system is going to be able to enable and support you in keeping those industry differentiators. And then at the top level, there's going to be those processes that really make you unique and competitive in the marketplace. They might be the way you go to market. They might be the way you do product development. They might be the way that you use social marketing or e-commerce. But these are the things that you really, if you sacrifice them, it could be have a huge impact on your business. So what we're saying is, as you go through this business process work that we're going to talk to you about today, be mindful of those processes that you can just leverage out of the box functionality and take best practice as a technology provides it, so that you don't have to customize. It's easier to take advantage of upgrades. And then be careful to capture what your industry differentiators are, and make sure that whatever technology package you select has that unique functionality. And then most importantly, that you really identify the requirements for those processes that make you competitive, so that you can match up those competitive advantage type requirements against the system, to make sure you have the right system and that you are either customizing in the right places, or taking maybe a niche type product that supports that competitive advantage that will enable you better than just an overall ERP package.
So how do we talk about, well, what we would like to talk about next is basic business process management fundamentals. And the first topic is really connecting process work to business value. Business operations are the execution of your business processes, or another way to state that, process is the work of the organization. It's how you get work done in your organizations. It's all about processes. And really understanding what end-to-end business processes need to do to create and sustain a healthy business that's innovative, lean, and more agile than others is really a business value that every executive, every business leader needs to be thinking about when it comes to executing their strategies. And creating a process foundation is really connects the dots between your strategic intent, your business relationships, the business capabilities, to truly enable your technology and empower your human resources. So it's really about creating that process foundation as an enablement to get the work done in an efficient manner. And ultimately, by doing so, you're going to ensure quality data that's going to support your digital strategies and opportunities to innovate and optimize. I often say, business process owners own the data as well. So when you can get that alignment, you'll definitely have better data in the long run. And you often, companies have struggle with their data. And this is all about getting a good data foundation so that you can truly utilize the technology to execute your strategies. So a word about business design and alignment and the importance of end-to-end processes. There's one way of thinking of it, and I think many companies, and January and I work with all kinds of different companies, but we often see that companies come to their ERP implementation with very functional thinking, right? They're thinking about, I work in this function and I need this functionality for my function, right? It supports the idea of specialization, focusing on executing their set of specific tasks exceptionally well. And in some cases, that's okay. But on the other hand, process thinking is where organizations that want to transform and truly be much more efficient, they need to move the thinking from functional thinking to process thinking. It's looking at your entire value chain. It includes thinking about your end goals or purpose for your end-to-end processes. And what are those handoffs between the functions? It's in process language, it's your upstream and your downstream process handoffs. So you could do process work in a one area, but you're always going to find it's going to impact somebody downstream or impact somebody upstream when you make your process changes in a silo. And what we really hope to get organizations thinking along the terms is this process perspective. And it really truly is a critical underpinning for effective business operations and change, because really aligning and integrating processes across those functional silos will give you that efficient delivery of customer value. January, did you have anything else to say on that? I mean, just the idea that we come across this a lot, and most organizations, would you say, are really functional thinking?
They are, and I think it can get you into trouble because, like you said, it just not thinking of the upstream and downstream impacts of how it affects, someone below them or how it affects someone above them. I think going about it from the process thinking allows you to get everybody in the room talking about the same strategy, the same processes, and really understanding how their work impacts another area and seeing if there's ways that you can gain efficiencies across the different groups versus just in one swim lane.
Right, and when you do that, that's when you start getting into the realm of business design. From a future state, or some people call it desired state, but whatever you call it, future state or desired state, you really want to create a business design and get alignment around that integrated process, end-to-end process thinking, so that everyone's on board as to what are the roles and responsibilities, who's going to do what, and how is that going to streamline ultimately for the good of the whole. How are we going to streamline these processes for the good of the whole organization? So why is business process management important? Well, we have a couple slides here that outline a couple thoughts on this. ERP implementations really at the end of the day are going to be significant changes to your business and its organization. And with that, you just can't throw the technology in. You want to first think about, what are the processes and potential organizational changes before you implement a system. So you're being really proactive in a business design when you think about your desired state in advance of your selection. When you go into a technology design session, now you're coming in with alignment that everybody says, yeah, this is really what we need from the system, and let's design the system to execute these processes, and let's accept some of these system functionality, that is a given, because now that we're aligned, we're in a better position to accept what the functionality of the system may offer you without additional customization. And it will highlight certainly organizational change management issues, because roles and responsibilities may change, and organizational structure, for that matter, could change when you start looking at processes.
And I think with the organizational change management, people underestimate this, but by doing it up front and involving people earlier on in the process, getting their feedback on why current state doesn't work, what is the pain associated with it, and what do they want that desired state to look like, because they're involved in that full transformation, they're more likely to be bought into it. There's less educating you have to do, and you minimize a lot of that resistance that you might get if you otherwise just threw in a system and just took whatever the system did, or just had one, group looking at it versus the entire organization. So it identifies, like Kim said, from an organization standpoint. Do you have people in the right seats? What does that look like? What kind of hiring do you need to do to put people in the right seats, or to support new positions that will help that overall strategy, but also just getting that buy-in and engagement from the beginning.
Yeah, the engagement is key, right? If you're engaging your stakeholders, your business process owners in a future state business design, you'll have a higher level of engagement to actually adopting then the new processes and the new technology that will enable a good bit of those processes, but not all of them. But now you have sort of a framework of this is how the organization is going to function. It also is going to give you insights to your overall cost estimation and KPIs, your benefit realization. So now that you've identified some of your key process owners, we always encourage the teams to figure out what's the benefit from changing from a current state to a desired state, and what kind of improvements are you going to see? Increased turnover or decreased turnover, efficiencies in your area. What are the metrics? So we really encourage our teams to, the client teams, to look at what are those benefits and to baseline it, and then also measure it, so that after you go live and you implement your process and your technology changes, organizational changes, you have something to show for what has improved.
Right, and the money that you spent. Yeah. And just also talking a little bit about the overall cost estimation. By doing this work up front and understanding what your needs are and how you want the system to function, how you need technology to function to enable those processes, allows you to select the right system that maybe doesn't require as much customization. By having all of this defined, you're less likely to customize because you know how you need it to work. And if a system is going to handle it a little bit differently, you can then sit back and say, okay, is this new way that the system's telling me to do it, is that going to significantly change our process, or can we do that and not have to incur a cost of customization and the risk of not being able to take upgrades? So it is really important to do this work up front to help you get that overall cost estimation.
Okay, so where we're going, and if you haven't heard it through our tone and our inflection here, is really, in our view, business process management is mandatory for all ERP implementations. Ultimately, it will reduce the risk to your project. It will increase the return on investment and identifies these cost-saving opportunities that we're discussing. And it will ensure differentiating business process and logics are not lost through and during the implementation, because going into your technology design sessions what you need to have in terms of process and process flow. And it will obviously protect and maintain your company competitive advantage, because your processes really are in place. It is the work of the organization, but it's in place to deliver value to your customers, right? And if you're efficiently doing processes, you will deliver that value, and you will deliver it more efficiently when you're mindful of that, what that business design needs to look like.
Yeah, and I just want to touch a little bit more on that. Reduces the overall risk to the project. I want to bring it back to not only does it helps you select the right system, the right technology that you need to support these processes, so that you don't have to go back to the drawing board and redo this, or you don't realize halfway through implementation that you've selected the wrong technology, which can be costly. It also reduces the risk of your people not adopting this new business process or this new technology, because like we mentioned in the previous slide, by involving them earlier and on and often, you're really starting to get that buy-in earlier versus later, which reduces that risk of them not adopting, them not, and then you not obtaining the benefits that you've set out to obtain as part of your implementation.
So to summarize, why is business process management important? Once you've documented not only your current state and then your future state business design in terms of processes, you can use that documentation to create training aids and also, traceability of process changes. I mean, we always recommend once you've spent the time to document your future state business design and you have alignment around that, you'll want some governance in place, a center of excellence, if you will, so that now you have this wonderful business design. Is that going to last you forever? No. The idea is to baseline your business design, and then you're going to continuously improve upon that as the years go by. You'll look at different process areas, or something may change in the business. You always want to be looking at, how do we continuously improve it, make it better?
Yep, but I think the key to this is a lot of companies will do the continuous improvement, but you often hear, and we're often called in a lot, into companies that they've made all these changes and improvements to their processes, but never updated the technology in parallel to support the changes. And so what ends up happening is you end up finding workarounds to support these new process improvements through Excel or other means without changing the technology, and then all of a sudden the technology doesn't work, and you're back to having to go back and define requirements and re-implement or choose a new technology. So what Kim is talking about is really critical in terms of that center of excellence, having that governance, so that when areas within your company make improvements, that you're including IT and other areas to make those changes within the technology, so that you continue to move along in parallel, and you're not diverting or diverging paths and becoming where you're not supporting each other.
Now I'm thinking about a client that we had about a couple of years ago, and it's this idea that they had built, they didn't have their processes documented, so all their processes were really built around making the technology work. So they built it all around the technology, and then they had all these workarounds. And they had a ton, and they really thought about these workarounds as processes. These are our processes that we need to implement in our new system. Once we got into the BPM work, we found out that they didn't need 90% of those workarounds, because we created a future state business design that made sense for the organization to deliver that customer value efficiently. 90% of the workarounds went away. And another point to that would be, you go to a technology solution and then they say, oh, we want you to document, we want to automate all of our workflows. Well, again, they were getting confused. Their workflows at the end of the day were not as numerous as their workarounds. They were really making the comparison of both of them together being the same. When we got down to it, they only had a handful of workflows that legitimately qualified for, let's get these automated in the new system. Because here's another thought about automating workflows. You have to maintain them. And you go to a technology provider and say, well, we want to do automated workflows. And they say, well, that's great. Our system can do that. Describe what your workflows are.
Yeah.
Well, if there's too many of them, you'll be hard pressed to really not only identify what those workflows need to be, but build them and maintain them in your system.
As well as the cost associated with building them.
Yes. So process work up front really does pay high dividends. So I talk a little bit about the panorama approach in terms of BPM methodologies. We have two approaches. We do a top-down and a bottom-up. So I'm going to talk about the bottom-up. It's really business process improvement and optimization. where we utilize Lean and Six Sigma techniques to really model those lower level value stream process activities and workflows. But then it's important when you do this kind of work that the work is, your process work is prioritized. When you start in the weeds, you can get lost in the weeds. So we really recommend when you do value stream process activities, you prioritize that, making sure that they're strategic and complex areas that you want to spend time to really streamline and optimize for goods and services. The second approach is a top-down business design and alignment. And it does utilize business process reengineering, or some people call it redesign, but it's techniques to break down the functional silos to really provide that end-to-end process understanding and visibility and control. It's an integrated efficiency and effectiveness, but we're looking at, what are the value chain processes and how do we make sure that they're very efficient and delivering that customer value. But it is a lot about re-engineering, and not every company is up to re-engineering. So just depends on the company. What's good for one company may not be good for another company. So we are open, and our top-down versus the bottom-up will help you with either objective. Now, there's three types of, this is sort of going into, what is business process management, and people get confused with all the terminology. But as I mentioned in our methodology, there's really three areas where you're either doing process improvement, to remove waste, improve a process area at a lower level. And then, there's also can move into optimization, where you're going to not only improve, but you're going to get it streamlined further to improve the efficiencies and get better business value out of that prioritized process value stream area. And then lastly, as I mentioned previously on the previous slide, business process reengineering usually is radical change. And in some cases, you're really starting over from scratch. Now you may ask, how do we do that? How do we start over from scratch? And what we do is we guide companies using best practice process frameworks to help start thinking about what's the industry doing and how well they're doing their processes, and where, how well they're benchmarked, so that you can get more of a best practice feel. But you still have to make it right for your company. It's not a cookie cutter approach when you use best practice process frameworks. But we'll work with the organization to help them redesign and completely start over from scratch if in fact it's necessary to really deliver that innovative business value in an efficient manner. So that, in our definition, all these things are under the business process management umbrella, if you will. So you can't do process work without a process hierarchy. So from a mapping strategy perspective, when we do, it is one level at a time, but how you go about it is important. We like to start with, on a top-down, the what. From a top-down, we try to build a framework from a high level and then go down the process hierarchy. We'll start with core processes at a level 1. And then we'll move to sub-processes at a level 2, and then we'll try to understand process activities at a level 3. At this juncture, we're really keeping people focused on what is it that they do to deliver, what are the processes, what is it that they do to deliver customer value. We try to keep the how they do it out of the conversation. We're really focused on a high level, what is it that they do? We have to get that in first. Then secondly, we move into how do they do it? We take the L3 process activity, and this is where you're going to really, dive deeper, if you will, into some value streams that are prioritized and say, okay, this process activity has so many process tasks and certainly work instructions. really at the level 4 and level 5 is where the system is going to enable a lot of these process tasks. They're at that transactional level. So as I mentioned, L1, level 1 is really at the value chain. What are the core processes that you do to deliver value? L2 is where you start figuring out some of the value streams that you may potentially dive deeper in. But when we dive deeper, we're always thinking about, how does that process flow? One way to do process work is think about the customer journey. How does the customer journey through your processes, right? From the customer relationship, establishing that, and then the operations, and then, the customer relationship reassessment, usually the client services components of your business. And then, from a product and service life cycle, same thing. What's that life cycle? So these are things that we will bring into the conversation when we're mapping to really get that flow of the processes to understand how that impacts each of these journeys. So in a perfect world, everybody's business design and alignment would be very organized, right? We'd understand what it is that we're doing, what's the customer experience, what information do we need to really execute strategy, what are our KPI and our reporting goals and objectives, and really get the organizational alignment before you start designing your system. Now, in doing so, you're going to have, to look at things. You're going to have to look at, how you're maintaining your data. We talked about the center of excellence for your processes. What's the organizational structure? Do your policies and procedures need to be updated? But by going through this effort, you're going to start to build this foundation that really truly will enable the organizational agility that you're after. So business process management, it's an iterative process. Moving from current state to future state, right? You're looking at selection, you're looking at your business requirements. At the same time, you should be looking at your processes. Which way you want to go is really truly up to the company, but you need to think about those things before you start moving into implementation and before you can do the system blueprinting and your test case business scenarios, and then ultimately implement and go live where your people, process, and technology change impacts are not only understood, but also integrated in your implementation and your execution of your change. January, do you have a thought about that, or?
No, I think it's just really important to, like you said, it's iterative, things change. Even as you're going through that continuous improvement process, you're going to be making tweaks to processes, tweaks to the system. So even after go live, you're still changing and augmenting to continuously move your company in the direction of improving that customer journey and value you deliver.
So obviously we've highlighted that process management is challenging. And really the top two challenges that any company has is, as I stated earlier, moving from that functional base to process thinking. The culture is the culture, and it becomes ingrained in how people think about process work and so forth in their silos. But making that change is probably the hardest change for organizations to move to process thinking. And then the second one is aligning process management efforts to the organization's strategy, because that's truly where process work takes time and it takes funding. As upfront to the funding to implement technology, you really have to work this into your budget. And allow time and effort to help the organization go through this. So the best way to do it, as we have found, is to integrate performance metrics to show the value of process work. as we talked about earlier. Understanding, from a current state to a future state, what are those metrics that are going to be documented, baselined, and measured to truly improve? But you do have to speak to it as well. And there's certainly, we've mentioned a bunch of benefits to doing this work, but you have to get it down to the level of what does this really mean to executing business strategy? And that's what you have to speak to your management team so that they understand the value of this work.
And with any kind of process change that you're making, you should always anticipate that you will see a dip in metrics or in performance of your people initially as they're coming up to speed, learning the new process, learning the new tasks that they need to be doing, learning new machinery, whatever it is, it takes time. So always expect that you're not going to see improvement right away. And when you're baseline measuring and coming up with goals and where you want to be at a certain point in time, that you're setting realistic expectations around how long it's going to take to really realize those process improvements or achieve those performance improvements in your metrics. All right, now a little bit about change management best practices and how does change management play a role in all of this process work. The biggest piece of it is really connecting the people side of the change to your overall business transformation. If the people don't change how they do their work or their job because they're not bought into the process change or the transformation, then it really doesn't matter what specific changes or technologies you put in place because you're not going to realize those benefits. It really comes down to the people. They make it work. And what we often see is leadership has all these great objectives. They want to be more efficient. They want to offer new service offerings. They want to, reduce costs or improve their technologies. But what the employee hears is that I'm going to need to have new skills. What new skills are going to be required? What are the new expectations of me? What is the change in my decision authority? Today I was able to approve these purchase orders and tomorrow I'm not going to be able to. So there's a loss of status. There's just all these unknown tasks, and what this translates into is unintended consequences. So people become less committed, there's resistance, they don't want to be trained, they avoid training, they make mistakes on purpose, so you have quality issues, reduced productivity, because they're trying to avoid having to make this change out of that fear. So it's really important to connect the what's in it for each employee so that you obtain these benefits. Ways that you can do this is establish a project name. What is the project? What's the purpose and why are we changing? What are the particulars? What is changing and who are the people?
And I'm going to take over because January is
I got so passionate.
Yes, good tickle in her throat there. But yes, to go on from this is really truly understanding, what's the project, why are we changing, what's the particulars and who will be changing, and really give people that detail. We'll talk a little bit more about how you do that. But one of the things, food for thought, we go into organizations and we're really trying to help them understand what is the scope of change. It's one thing to have a funding for a technology ERP project, but do your sponsors, do your organization really understand how big this change is going to be? And we call that scope of change. And so I'll let you read on the screen here, food for thought, in which way to think about this. But ultimately, if it's fundamentally altering structures, processes, and ways of working within your business, it's transformation. Otherwise, it is just going to be an ERP or a technology implementation, business improvement.
Mm-hmm. So there are different ways that we go about measuring how well people are hearing information, how they're feeling about these changes that are coming. And it really starts with doing a variety of different assessments to see how ready your organization is at the bottom down all the way up to the top, how ready they are for this change. And so there's a lot of different things you need to look at in terms of cultural fit and alignment with the overall strategy and new processes that you may be putting into place to deliver that customer value. There's also understanding what the scale and scope of change looks like. How many people are going to be impacted by this? How many processes are changing? How many groups are changing? These are all questions that you need to understand to know how to address the people alongside this process transformation. Change resistance and capacity. What is the change saturation? What has it been for your company? How has your company dealt with changes in the past? Was it good? Is it something that people are going to think negatively about or positively about? What do your sponsors look like? And I'm not talking about just at a project team. I'm talking about anybody who has people that report up to them within the organization. They are a sponsor of this change. They are a leader of this change. So down to your supervisor level, do they have the skill set required to lead the change, to lead their individuals or their employees through this change? And if not, what can you do to get them that skill set so that they are good change leaders? And then understanding all your stakeholders and where they sit within the organization. What is their level of influence and what is their level of interest in the project? All of these allow you to put together a really good change management plan that will guide you through your business or technology transformation.
So in terms of OCM planning then, we do follow an ADKAR approach, ProSite, ADKAR, and ADKAR stands for creating awareness before desire, and then once you have desire, you can create knowledge and then ability, and of course you want to reinforce that. So along those lines then, we just talked about assessments, organizational assessments. How ready is your organization as you prepare for that change, and you understand the scope of change, and then moving into then what that business design is going to look like, and then how well that's going to be tolerated. And to make sure that you're successful, we want to make sure that the OCM strategy and roadmap going forward is clearly documented so that then you can manage the change, and that will create also business alignment, and it'll also create that readiness. We call that in Kotter's change management theory, that's called enabling environment, making sure that everything that you need to execute your new processes and your new technology, people are ready and the organization is ready and is enabling this change. And then of course, when you go into the deployment, what's the impact on the workforce? Are there going to be transitions for them? Different roles and responsibilities may be identified, and making sure that they're very comfortable in that transition. And their job may be changing, but it's not going to go away per se. It's just going to look different. Making sure that they have those skill sets through the training and development strategy and plan, making sure that they're ready and have the ability to adopt and execute the change. And then, of course, reinforcing the change is all about optimization. The benefits realization plan that we discussed, now you're going to measure it and you're going to manage it. And when we talk about performance management, sometimes we'll look at incentive programs, making sure that the incentives are clearly tied to your business realization plan, that there's no disconnects there, that you can truly get that change ROI. So lastly,
organizational change management, make sure that you have an organizational change management plan that includes elements such as communication, sponsor leadership, executive buy-in, training, as well as coaching and resistance management. Make sure that you've customized and process-based your training materials, so it's not just about the technology. Make sure that you're educating on what the process changes are, targeted employee communications. Make sure that you have a good segmented plan, that you're delivering the right communications to the right stakeholders at the right time, and that you have an implementation of policy and procedure changing prior to the implementation of your new system.
Absolutely. And to summarize then, why is OCM and BPM matter in a technology initiative? I think we really hit on all these throughout our time together here today, but it's important because it really needs to happen. Process ownership needs to be identified so you can enable a smoother and faster system integration. It's going to cut down on your implementation timeline. If you've done all this work in advance, you'll certainly not need as much time to implement. It will ensure that cross-functional alignment, thinking end-to-end business processes throughout the organization and not coming into the design session with everybody with their own agenda, which really does drive those customizations up. And then it's going to also position the organization to really have that go live, successful go live, and realize those benefits faster. We've seen it time and time again. Case study after case study will support these facts. Certainly, we've certainly seen it through our surveys internally and any other case study that's been documented out there about why ERP implementations fail. And then lastly, you're going to get those process efficiencies so that the company is going to be positioned for sustainable growth and really truly enhance their competitive advantage. We always like to end with the thought that, again, technology enables business strategy, not the other way around. And this is one last slide before we open it up for questions. This last slide is just a reminder of, going through the process of process work, if you will, and organizational change management. It will give you a culture. It will help your culture change such that it becomes a culture of continuous improvement, so that your process maturity and the organization is always continuously improving. And why that is so important is because companies, to be competitive, really need to be innovative, right? And you can't be innovative if you're not always looking at how do we do things better? How do we drive better customer value? So you really want, at the end of the day, to create a culture of continuous improvement and always with the mindset of improving your processes.
And then about our free consulting hour. So to qualify for your 1 free hour, since you did stay through this entire webinar, please visit our Contact Us page at the link provided in the chat box and enter the code free hour along with your comments in how we can help section of the form. So again, we'll leave this up for a couple of minutes while we take a couple of questions. So the first question we have is, how can you sell process work to executives who think they only need a system to resolve current problems? And that's a really interesting one, and we come up against this a lot in our world, actually, when we go into clients.
Yeah, I mean, we did try to bring it up in terms of connecting process work to business value, and that's certainly the best way to overcome the challenge. You really have to connect it to why is it going to help, doing this work, why is it going to help the organization execute their strategies better? And all organizations have strategies. Whether they execute them well is always a different story. So really trying to equate what the time and the effort and the money spent on process work is ultimately going to realize, be part of your benefits realization process or your documentation.
Right, and so that brings us to our next question is how do you quantify the benefits associated with project work? And that can be difficult sometimes, but I think as you're going through this process and if you incorporate as part of the process, what are the different metrics you use today in that particular work stream to measure how well you're performing, whether it's number of inventory turns or whether it's how quickly you're shipping product out the door, or how many missed shipments do you have, whatever it makes sense for your business as you're going through the process of work, quantifying those metrics and then understanding where your current state is today. What is that current metric at today? And then benchmarking it against other people within your current industry or company size and how are they doing? And then really kind of being able to figure out, if you're so far off, what can you get to? What is achievable? And I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. We always encourage when you do that benefit realization metrics and so forth that everything will roll up to your high-level company KPIs and metrics. I don't know if you have a balanced scorecard approach is a good way to start. And so maybe you look at those first, and then you go to your various process areas and say, okay, what are the key metrics for this process area? And you can, there's a lot of good benchmarking, industry benchmarking for process areas. Once you've clearly identified your process areas, then you can really start looking at benchmarking data and utilize that much better to help you formulate your benefits realization plan.
Yep. All right, so that takes us to our webinar. To the end of our webinar, but if you have any questions about the information that we discussed today, feel free to give us a call. Contact Laura Florence. She's our Director of Business Development, and she can route you in the right direction and get you on the phone with some of our experts that can maybe answer some of those questions. Her contact information is there. And again, we just want to thank you for spending this hour with us today and learning more about business process management, a key component of ERP ROI. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.